Hey everyone, welcome to the 5th season of Travel Tales, a podcast by Afar. I'm Aislyn, and yes, I host the show. Each week on the podcast, we hear stories of life-changing travel from poets, writers, entrepreneurs, authors, and so many more. And this season, we'll be sharing short Q&As inspired by each episode that you can only find here. This is Travel Tales. Tess, welcome to Travel Tales.
Hi, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see you. Wonderful to see your background. It's very library-like. I was hoping that we could just start with having you tell me a little bit about what you do.
Well, actually, this is kind of a crazy one, but my day-to-day is that I'm a poet. So behind me is a collection of poetry volumes that I've accumulated over 25 years of reading and writing poetry. I write nonfiction and essays, and I'm actually working on a play right now. But
cool.
the bulk of my time is really like thinking about poems.
I love it. I love it. Well, there is poetry in the story that listeners are going to hear, which is about traveling to this Italian epicenter of violin-making. What led you to this place? How did you get there?
Well, I had a child who surprised me when he was 3 by asking for a violin. We'd been in a pub in Nova Scotia, and it had been raining outside, and we'd stayed a really long time and watched tons of fiddle music, and he wanted to play the fiddle. And so this was a very highly defined early love, and I began to fall down the rabbit hole of that love as well. And so when I would read articles about violins or violin tuning or the crazy, beautiful lore of the violin, I would clip them and tell him things about them. And we also would seek out books on instruments together.
Cool.
And one time I came across this article in the New York Times travel section, which I read religiously, especially for quirky articles. And it was about Cremona, which has been a center of violin making for over 400 years. And I thought, one of these years we'll go to Italy. And when we do, I will take my children, or I guess it was just my son at that point, and we'll go look at violins. You know, the way that some kids want to go look at dinosaurs.
Violins were his dinosaur. What was it like watching him pick up a fiddle for the first time?
So it was so incredible because we actually are very gifted in that we have a violin store 4 blocks from our house, a really noted one called Ifshin. And you can go there the way that, you know, you might go again to like a pet store or a petting zoo or something. And they're very generous and kind. And I walked in with my 3-year-old who is almost 4. And I said, he's very young, but he keeps talking about wanting a violin. What should we do? Yeah. And they agreed that he was young, and they gave him a very small violin, and he held it. And then his first question to everyone was, but how do I make it sound beautiful? So then we thought, okay, you're invested here. Yeah. And then it turned out that they gave us a list of teachers. There was a really wonderful teacher who lived really nearby. He got started on bluegrass at a certain point. He's transitioned to bluegrass and classical. And it's been this crazy journey for me because I grew up as a singer. I love music of all kinds. I'm like passionately love to sing jazz and opera and you know, gospel. I love music, and I sing a lot, although not professionally. But this was this kind of crazy thing where we went down a path of sort of mutual joy together for a while. Until now.
Yeah. Yeah. And all those years later. So how old was he when you were in Cremona?
So this was last summer. So we're talking, he was 11 turning 12, and this year he's 12 turning 13.
Wow. And so what was it like for him to be in this place, you know, after years of dedicating himself to an instrument, and then for you as his parent, his mother, to be watching that journey unfold?
Well, first of all, I would always recommend for those people considering a family trip to Italy, why not do a very hot, crowded week in Rome? Why not do a crowded, hot week in Florence?
Yeah.
You know, don't check off the best of list. Like, you can see Michelangelo's David, hopefully with a spirit of abundance, that maybe there'll be a time when it's very gracious and easy to go, maybe in an off season. But I think that you can plant the love of Italy through lots of these beautiful small cities that are maybe slightly less off the best of map and focused on something wonderful. So part of it was just the joy of taking in Italy with the cobblestone streets and the beautiful cathedrals. We were there during a music festival, and there were all of these amazing 10 euro concerts in palazzi. So that was really fabulous, that you could just have pretty amazing short concerts that were accessible and delightful, where you would just kind of, give an hour of an afternoon and listen to madrigals. So there's a feeling that the city was alive with music, and that was remarkable. I think they thought it was magical to go inside in this city of violins, to go see somebody who had devoted his life to making violins in a solo shop. It was a beautiful building that had an ancient narrow feeling about it, and maybe curved ceilings, and was just a beautiful European workshop full of like dust motes and wood shavings and brushes and interesting looking awls and carving tools. What I didn't realize until later was like what a big impression it had made on both of them. In some ways they still talk about, how wonderful Italy was, how they'd love to go back again. And I think just feeling that in a very like steady and gentle way, the long ongoingness of making art and making music and making beautiful things generation after generation, and how that gives you a kind of it's like stargazing. You have a kind of respect for the ancientness of our lives in time. Yeah, it was like a lot of layers of experience came through this trip.
Yeah, and how cool that it made such an impression on them. I mean, that's always the goal with travel and children, right? Is you want to give them these experiences that somehow shape their lives.
I think we went also to Ravenna, which is a center of mosaic making, and we looked at the beautiful mosaics on the ceiling, and then we, as a family, put together a gorgeous mosaic duck that was modeled on a floor of an Algerian duck, of a mosaic that had been found in Algiers. And that was a huge experience for my daughter, and she really would like to go back, and she'd like to study mosaic making. She's telling me she's going to be 9 this year. But again, I think part of it was a small city, a hands-on experience, something that seemed genuinely enlivening and interesting to everyone, because it sort of met them where they were, as opposed to thinking Italy, best of, check the box, see Michelangelo's David no matter what. And so I think if we follow our interests and the interests of our children, the genuine, big, beautiful interests, it can make travel really alive. My son is also very into World War I recently. He really is fascinated by like the scale of this war and the interesting fact that all of this happened, that Europe kind of exploded in that way. And he has questions like that's something else he'd like to do. And so he and his dad are like nerding out about it. But I would say you can give this to your kids if you're willing to help them nerd out, and you're willing to nerd out too. And then you can have this like real richness to the experience.
Had music shaped your travels before this? Like, has that been something that has been part of your travel life?
I don't think I'd ever made a musical pilgrimage, but now I would really love to go to Venice, because I think Venice is a very alive musical city. I grew up singing choral music, and I could imagine going and hearing like the children's choirs of those English churches around the holidays at Christmas when they do that beautiful plain song, that would be wonderful. But so cool. And of course there's all kinds of other musical pilgrimages you could make, like Argentina for the tango. And I think that like that's a way to check into the world. I'm an open water swimmer, so I sometimes plan travel around where, at least for some of the trip, will I get a fantastic swim.
Yeah. And so now maybe a fantastic concert.
as well. A swim and a concert. I know it sounds ideal, right? Let's find that place.
I was just actually in Puerto Rico on kind of a musical pilgrimage, and also a good place to swim. So, you can get both there.
Totally. But I do think this quality of where is your pilgrimage is a great question to bring into your thinking about travel, because I think then you're going to find something that meets your heart's desire as opposed to sort of following anyone else's instructions.
Absolutely. Although you do paint quite a picture of Cremona. Are there other things that you didn't talk about in the story that you feel like are notable or reasons to go?
So I mentioned the fact that there's this thing called the Monteverdi Festival, but there is excellent programming around the arts and music in Cremona year round. Mm-hmm. Apparently they were doing a whole opera series in October and November where they were doing a whole line of operas. And again, they didn't seem incredibly expensive. Like, obviously, it's a big splurge to get yourself to Cremona, but I think that then you could have a week of wonderful listening and looking at art that could just blow your mind. And you would feel part of a community that's been devoted to making some of the most beautiful things for hundreds of years. And again, like the little museum of art, the little cathedral, these things really sort of scratch an itch, I think. It's just, there's an intimacy of scale. And because it's also close to Milan, there's rather good shopping, I have to say.
And that could be someone's pilgrimage for sure.
Surely. There are definitely shopping pilgrimages to be made in the world.
I love it. Well, before we started the recording, you were talking about how you've learned that instruments are an organism and that you really have to attend to your violins in this way. Could you just share a little bit more about that? Because I think it's so fascinating.
Yeah, one of the things that's so beautiful about a violin is that in lots of ways it's alive. The tuning isn't going to hold weather to weather. There was a day here where we have the violins on the wall normally, and it abruptly turned very hot and dry. And the wood, well, we came home and the strings on the violins were like falling off, which was really alarming, like what had happened. Yeah. So we went to the violin store and they told us like this amount of dry air, especially so suddenly, would cause the wood of the violin to contract and the strings are falling off. And the bridge of the violin fell out of place also in that motion. And we realized that if we think it's going to be hot or dry, or that we really need to be incredibly responsive, even within our own house, to the conditions that might be swirling around in the world.
Yeah.
It made me realize that these are these incredibly attuned instruments. They take not just tuning, but attunement. They'll never quite make the same scale. It's up to you to be listening with your ear, to bring your ear to the violin, not the other way around. They're instruments that we have to play and live with a great deal of discernment. And I think we live in an era where there's this notion that intelligence is just going to be sort of provided to us, potentially artificially. And I couldn't imagine, for instance, that level of beautifully evolved discernment between the hand and the ear and the fingers and the bow. And there was something incredibly human and relational about the violin and its relation to us.
Yeah, it's very hard to imagine outsourcing that in a way that would have quite that same, humanity, I guess.
Well, and then the question is, why would you want to?
Yeah.
Like true. There's something so incredibly beautiful about exactly that level of finesse and care. And it's like what we have evolved for, like the cultivation of our pleasure, really. And it's like, why would we want to like outsource the joy of our bodies to anyone else?
I love that you also, it's something that you need to kind of check in with daily, like there's poetry in that. Well, is there anything else a year after this pilgrimage that you took, as you've watched your children come back and continue on with their lives, as you've continued on with your life, anything else that's really stayed with you from that experience?
Well, for those of you, when you've listened to the podcast, I guess the question is, were we going to buy this violin? And was that an extravagance? And was it the right thing to do? And I have to say that I still don't know to what extent my son will want to go on with his musical interests and love. But this year of having him get to play on an instrument that is helping him hear and really like savor his hearing has been this incredible gift. And it's really fun, whatever your kid does, in a way that's maybe not pressuring or, you know, overwhelming, but to give them, you know, if they were an artist, to get them the best canvases that they could, or the best brushes, or the best pigments, and to really enjoy feeling that you can help someone cultivate their talent by having having a beautiful echo of it. We all hear the songs more clearly because this instrument is good. Anyway, it's been this thing of like honoring this interest and talent, and also, you know, telling our child we take him seriously and letting him explore what that means for him. You know?
Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and your story, Tess. I appreciate it. Okay, that was our show. I'll include a link to the full episode below, and please don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out.